The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Thompson house, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The white colonial mansion sat proudly on Elm Street, surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges and a garden that made neighbors stop and stare. But inside this beautiful home, something was terribly wrong. Helen Thompson stood at the kitchen window, watching her 4-year-old twin boys play in the backyard. Michael and David moved like silent ghosts across the green grass, pointing at things, gesturing to each other, but never making a sound. Not a single word had ever passed their lips. Not mama or daddy or even no, just silence. The boys looked exactly like any other children their age. They had bright blue eyes and sandy brown hair that never seemed to stay combed. They were healthy, active, and clearly intelligent. When Helen pointed to objects and named them, the boys would nod and sometimes bring her exactly what she asked for. They understood everything. They just wouldn't speak. Helen remembered the day she first realized something was different. Most babies start babbling around 6 months old, making those sweet ba-ba-ba sounds that make parents smile. But Michael and David had skipped that stage completely. The pediatrician told her not to worry. Some children are just late bloomers, he said with a confident smile. They'll catch up. But they didn't catch up. By their first birthday, when other toddlers were saying their first words, the twins remained silent. By age 2, when most children could string together simple sentences, Michael and David still communicated only through pointing and pulling their parents toward what they wanted. The house felt strange because of this silence. Most homes with young children are filled with chatter, questions, laughter, and the occasional tantrum. But the Thompson house was quiet in a way that made visitors uncomfortable. People would come for dinner and keep glancing at the boys, waiting for them to say something. Anything. When nothing came, the adults would fill the silence with nervous chatter about the weather or work. Robert Thompson, the boys' father, threw himself into finding answers. He was a successful lawyer who believed every problem had a solution if you just worked hard enough to find it. He scheduled appointment after appointment with specialists in the city. Speech therapists, child psychologists, hearing specialists, neurologists. They saw them all. The hearing test showed the boys could hear perfectly. The psychological evaluations found no signs of autism or developmental delays. The neurological exams revealed healthy, normal brains. Every test came back the same way. Nothing was wrong. The doctors would scratch their heads and suggest patience. Some children just develop at their own pace, they would say. But Helen could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't understand it either. The first nanny quit after 2 weeks. Nancy was a grandmother who had raised 5 children of her own and thought she knew everything about kids. But she couldn't handle the silence. It's just not natural, she told Helen on her last day. Children should make noise. These boys, it's like they're in their own world and I can't get in. The second nanny lasted a month. Patricia had a degree in early childhood education and came with glowing references. She tried everything she knew. Picture cards, songs, games, rewards for any attempt at speech. But nothing worked. The boys would watch her efforts with polite interest, like they were observing an interesting experiment, but they remained silent. I don't think I'm helping them, Patricia admitted during their final meeting. They're sweet children, really they are. But I feel like I'm failing them every day. They need someone who understands, whatever this is. The third nanny was different. Mrs. Crawford was stern and old-fashioned, the type who believed children should be seen and not heard. Ironically, this made her perfect for the job, at least in theory. She didn't seem bothered by the boys' silence at all. But she also didn't seem to care about connecting with them. She kept them fed, clean, and safe, but there was no warmth, no joy in their daily routine. Michael and David grew more withdrawn under Mrs. Crawford's care. They stopped making eye contact with their parents and spent most of their time playing quietly in their room. When Helen would try to hug them, they would stand stiffly, accepting the affection but not returning it. After 3 months, Helen couldn't take it anymore. We need someone who actually cares about our boys, she told Robert one evening after putting the children to bed. Mrs. Crawford treats them like they're broken. But they're not broken. They're just different. Robert nodded, though Helen could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He was starting to lose hope too. Maybe we should try that residential program in Boston, he suggested quietly. The one Dr. Williams mentioned. The thought of sending their 4-year-old boys away to live at a special facility made Helen's stomach turn. "They're not even 5 years old yet," she whispered. "I won't give up on them. There has to be another way." But privately, Helen was beginning to wonder if Robert was right. The silence in their house was growing heavier each day. Friends had stopped calling. Family visits became awkward and brief. Even Helen's own mother had started making excuses not to come over. The boys seemed to sense their parents' growing desperation. They became even quieter, if that was possible, spending hours sitting together on the window seat in their bedroom, looking out at the world but never trying to join it. Sometimes Helen would catch them staring at her with those bright blue eyes, and she wondered what they were thinking. Did they know how much she worried? Did they understand that their silence was breaking her heart? At night, after Robert fell asleep, Helen would lie awake listening to the sounds of the house. The old grandfather clock in the hallway, the branches scratching against the roof, the distant hum of traffic, but never the sound she longed to hear most. Her children's voices calling for her, asking for water, or just chatting with each other the way siblings do. The house on Elm Street looked perfect from the outside, but inside a family was slowly falling apart. Helen Thompson was about to fire her third nanny in 6 months, and she had no idea where to turn next. She just knew that somewhere out there was someone who could reach her boys, someone who could unlock whatever was keeping their voices trapped inside. She had no way of knowing that help was already on its way, traveling north from Alabama on a Greyhound bus, carrying nothing but a worn suitcase and a lifetime of love to give. The Greyhound bus pulled into the Hartford station on a cold Tuesday morning in November 1962. Ruby Washington stepped down onto the platform, her worn leather suitcase in one hand and a paper bag with her lunch in the other. At 55, she moved with the careful grace of someone who had worked hard her whole life, but never let it break her spirit. Ruby had traveled almost 800 miles from Montgomery, Alabama, responding to an advertisement she'd seen in the newspaper her cousin had sent her. Experienced childcare provider needed for special situation. Patience and understanding required. Good compensation. The words special situation had caught her attention. In her 25 years of caring for children, Ruby had learned that every child was special in their own way. Some just needed a little more time and love to show it. The employment agency office was small and cramped, with peeling wallpaper and a coffee-stained carpet. "Mrs. Patterson," the agent looked Ruby up and down with barely concealed skepticism. She had already sent 3 nannies to the Thompson house, and all of them had quit. Mrs. Patterson was running out of candidates willing to take on what everyone was calling an impossible situation. "Now, I need to be honest with you about this position," Mrs. Patterson said, shuffling through Ruby's paperwork. "The Thompson boys are unusual. They're 4 years old and have never spoken a word. Not one word. The family has money and they're willing to pay well, but these children are difficult. Very difficult." Ruby listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She had raised 7 children of her own back in Alabama, plus countless others in her community. She'd helped families through poverty, illness, and loss. She'd worked with children who couldn't hear, children who couldn't walk, and children who had been hurt so badly they'd forgotten how to trust. Difficult was not a word that scared her. "Have the doctors found anything wrong with them?" Ruby asked. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "Nothing. They've been to every specialist you can imagine. Physically, they're perfectly healthy. Mentally, they seem bright. They just won't talk. The last nanny said it was like they were living in their own world, completely separate from everyone else." Ruby nodded thoughtfully. In her experience, children didn't retreat into their own worlds without a reason. Something had taught these boys that their voices didn't matter, or that speaking wasn't safe. She'd seen it before, though never quite like this. The ride to the Thompson house took 20 minutes through neighborhoods that grew fancier with each mile. Ruby watched the houses get bigger and the lawns get greener until the taxi pulled up in front of a white colonial mansion that looked like something from a magazine. Helen Thompson answered the door herself, which surprised Ruby. Most wealthy families she'd worked for had maids or housekeepers who handled such things. Helen looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes and worry lines around her mouth that seemed too deep for a woman her age. "You must be Miss Washington," Helen said, forcing a smile. "Please come in." The house was beautiful but felt empty somehow. Ruby's trained eye noticed the lack of children's artwork on the refrigerator. No toys scattered in the living room, No sounds of little feet running overhead. It was too clean, too quiet for a house with 4-year-old twins. I should prepare you, Helen said as she led Ruby to the kitchen.
Michael and David are...
Well, they're not like other children. They've never spoken, not once. They understand everything we say, but they just won't talk back. The doctors can't explain it. Ruby could hear the pain in the mother's voice, the exhaustion of years of worry and unanswered questions. Where are the boys now? She asked. In their room. They spend most of their time there. Helen's voice caught slightly. I'll introduce you, but don't expect much response. They don't really connect with new people. They climbed the stairs to a bright, cheerful bedroom with 2 twin beds and more toys than Ruby had ever seen in one place. But the boys themselves were sitting quietly by the window, looking out at the backyard. They were beautiful children with bright blue eyes and sandy hair, but there was something distant about them, like they were looking at the world from very far away. Michael, David, Helen called softly. I'd like you to meet Miss Ruby. She's going to be taking care of you. The boys turned to look at Ruby, their expressions polite but guarded. Ruby had seen that look before. Children who had learned not to expect much from adults, who had been disappointed too many times to get excited about someone new. Ruby didn't try to shake their hands or force them to respond. Instead, she smiled warmly and spoke directly to them. Hello, Michael. Hello, David. I'm very happy to meet you both. I've come all the way from Alabama to be here with you. The boys watched her carefully, taking in her kind face and gentle voice. Ruby noticed how they stood close together, like they were protecting each other from the world. I brought something with me that I'd like to show you, Ruby continued, reaching into her suitcase. She pulled out a small wooden bird, carved and painted by hand. This little robin lived on my windowsill back home. Every morning, he would sing the most beautiful songs to wake me up. Would you like to see him? David took a small step forward, interested despite himself. Ruby held the bird out, and after a moment he reached out to touch it gently with one finger. He likes music, Ruby said softly, just like his mama did and her mama before her. Music is something that lives in our hearts, and sometimes it needs to come out through our voices. Helen watched this interaction with amazement. In just 5 minutes, Ruby had gotten more response from David than Mrs. Crawford had managed in 3 months. After the boys returned to their window seat, Helen and Ruby talked privately in the kitchen. Helen explained the history, the doctor visits, the failed therapies, the previous nannies who couldn't cope with the silence. I should warn you, Helen said finally. This job has defeated everyone who's tried it. I don't know what's wrong with my boys, but whatever it is, it's bigger than anything we've faced before. If you want to change your mind. Ruby looked out the window at the boys playing silently in the backyard. They moved together like dancers who had rehearsed the same routine 1,000 times, communicating without words in ways that most people never learn to do with words. Mrs. Thompson, Ruby said quietly, I've been caring for children since I was barely more than a child myself. I've learned that sometimes the quietest ones have the most to say. They just need someone who knows how to listen. She paused, watching David help Michael climb onto the swing set. Those boys aren't broken. They're just waiting for someone to show them that their voices matter, that it's safe to use them. Give me time, and I promise you'll hear those beautiful voices. Helen felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time in months, someone was talking about her sons with hope instead of pity or frustration. The position is yours if you want it, Helen said. But I have to ask, what makes you think you can succeed where everyone else has failed? Ruby smiled, and for a moment Helen saw something that had been missing from her house for too long. Genuine warmth and confidence. Because I'm not here to fix them, Mrs. Thompson. I'm here to love them. Sometimes that's all a child needs to find their voice. Ruby's first morning with the Thompson boys began like every other morning in the silent house, but she was determined to change that. While Helen and Robert left for work, Ruby quietly observed Michael and David's routine. They moved through their morning like little robots, getting dressed, brushing their teeth, eating breakfast, all without making a sound or really looking at each other. But Ruby noticed things others had missed. The way David always waited for Michael to go first down the stairs, how Michael would gently touch David's shoulder when he seemed scared. These boys weren't disconnected from the world. They were deeply connected to each other. They had created their own private language of looks and touches because somehow, words had become too dangerous to use. Good morning, sunshine, Ruby said to Michael as he sat down for breakfast. He looked up, surprised. Most adults only spoke to him when they wanted him to do something. Ruby wasn't asking for anything. She was just being friendly. "And good morning to you too, sweet boy," she said to David, ruffling his hair gently. "Did you sleep well? I bet you had good dreams." The boys ate their cereal while Ruby made conversation as if they were chatting back. "I slept pretty good myself, thank you for asking. Though I did wake up once when I heard a cat outside my window. Sounded just like the cats back home in Alabama. Do you boys like cats?" David nodded slightly. It was small, but it was something. "I thought you might," Ruby smiled. "You've got kind eyes just like people who love animals do." After breakfast, Ruby did something no previous caregiver had tried. Instead of setting up educational activities or trying to force the boys to practice speaking, she simply went about her daily tasks while talking to them constantly. "Now, I need to fold this laundry," she announced, settling down on the living room floor with a basket of clean clothes. "Michael, would you like to help me? You can hand me the towels, and David, you can stack them nice and neat. We'll make a good team." As they worked together, Ruby began to hum. It was an old spiritual her grandmother had sung while hanging clothes on the line back in Alabama.
"Swing low, sweet chariot," filled the quiet house with gentle melody. The boys froze.
They'd heard music before and on the radio, on television. But this was different. This was music made by a real person, right there in the room with them. Ruby kept humming while she folded, not making a big deal of it, but watching the boys from the corner of her eye. David started swaying slightly to the rhythm. Ruby pretended not to notice, just kept humming and folding. Then Michael began moving too, just a gentle rocking motion. But Ruby's heart sang. These children weren't disconnected from the world. They were hungry for it. Over the next few days, Ruby established new routines. Everything they did together came with a soundtrack. She hummed while cooking lunch, sang softly while giving baths, and told stories in a rhythmic, musical way that made even the most ordinary events sound like adventures. Once upon a time, she would begin while helping them get dressed. There were 2 brave princes who lived in a castle made of sunshine. Every morning they would put on their royal clothes. First the magic socks that would help them walk through puddles, then the special shirts that would keep them warm all day. The boys began to look forward to these stories. Ruby could see it in their eyes. The anticipation, the way they would hurry through other activities to get to story time. But Ruby's real breakthrough came when she started talking about feelings. Previous caregivers had focused on trying to get the boys to speak, but Ruby focused on helping them understand that their emotions mattered. "David looks a little sad today," she would observe out loud. "I wonder if something is bothering him. Michael, do you think your brother might be feeling worried about something?" At first the boys seemed shocked that an adult was paying attention to their feelings. Most grown-ups only cared about their behavior, whether they were being good or causing trouble. But Ruby cared about what was happening inside their hearts. "You know," Ruby said one afternoon while they colored together, "sometimes when I was a little girl, I felt so many things inside that I didn't know what to do with them all. Happy and sad and angry and excited all mixed up together. My mama taught me that feelings are like birds. If you keep them trapped inside, they get tired and stop singing. But if you let them out, they can fly and make beautiful music." She paused, watching both boys carefully. "I bet you boys have lots of feelings inside, don't you? Lots of birds waiting to sing." That evening, Ruby made another important discovery. While helping the boys get ready for bed, she noticed David trying to tell Michael something with gestures. Michael wasn't understanding, and David was getting frustrated. Ruby watched as David's face grew red and tears started forming in his eyes. "Oh, honey," Ruby said softly, kneeling down to David's level. "You're trying to tell your brother something important, aren't you? And it's hard when he can't understand?" David nodded, tears spilling over. For the first time since she'd arrived, Ruby saw real emotion from one of the boys. "Sometimes words make things easier," Ruby said gently. "Words are like bridges that help us share what's in our hearts with people we love. Your brother loves you so much, David. I bet he wishes he could understand what you're trying to tell him." She looked at both boys, who were listening intently. "You know what? I think both of you have been protecting each other by staying quiet. Sometimes when the world feels scary, staying silent feels safer. But you don't have to protect each other from everything anymore. I'm here to help keep you safe so your voices can be free." That night, as Ruby tucked them into bed, she began singing a lullaby her own mother had sung to her. Her voice was soft and warm, filling the dark room with comfort. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. And if that mockingbird won't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring." Halfway through the song, Ruby heard something that made her heart stop. David was humming along, just barely, almost under his breath, but he was making sound, musical sound. Ruby didn't change her expression or stop singing. She just continued the lullaby while inside her spirit soared. The first crack had appeared in the wall these boys had built around their voices. After that night, Ruby began incorporating more music into everything they did. She sang counting songs while they played with blocks, made up rhymes about their daily activities, and taught them clapping games that her own children had loved. The boys began responding more each day. First David, then Michael started clapping along with the rhythm games. They would sway during the lullabies and watch Ruby's mouth intently when she sang, as if trying to figure out how the sounds were made. "Music is the first language," Ruby explained to Helen one evening after the boys were asleep. "Before babies can talk, they respond to rhythm and melody. These boys have been quiet for so long. They've forgotten that making sound can be joyful instead of dangerous." Helen listened with amazement as Ruby described the small daily victories. David humming along with lullabies, Michael clapping in rhythm, both boys starting to make eye contact during songs. "But will they ever actually speak?" Helen asked, afraid to hope too much. Ruby smiled. "Mrs. Thompson, those boys have been storing up words for 4 years. When they're ready to let them out, you're going to be amazed at what they have to say. We just need to show them that their voices are gifts, not burdens." In the quiet house on Elm Street, something was stirring. 2 little boys who had been silent their whole lives were beginning to remember that they had voices, and that those voices were worth hearing. 3 months had passed since Ruby arrived at the Thompson house. The silence was still there, but it felt different now. Instead of the heavy, worried quiet that had filled the rooms before, there was a sense of anticipation, like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting for something wonderful to happen. Ruby had established a rhythm with the boys that felt natural and joyful. Every morning started with the good morning song she had made up, where she would sing about the sunshine, the birds outside, and how happy she was to see Michael and David. The boys would smile and sometimes even bounce a little in their beds, though they still hadn't made any sounds with their voices. But Ruby could see the progress in 100 small ways. David had started reaching for her hand when they walked outside. Michael would bring her books when he wanted a story. Both boys had begun to show real emotions, laughing silently when Ruby told funny stories, looking concerned when she pretended to hurt her finger, running to comfort each other when one seemed upset. "They're learning to trust again," Ruby explained to Helen one evening. "These boys have been protecting themselves by staying quiet for so long it's become a habit. But habits can be changed with love and patience." The breakthrough came on a stormy Thursday evening in February. Connecticut had been hit with a winter storm that knocked out power lines and sent tree branches crashing into yards all over the neighborhood. The Thompson house still had electricity, but the wind was howling something fierce, and rain was beating against the windows like someone throwing handfuls of pebbles. Michael and David had always been afraid of storms. Even before Ruby came, Helen had noticed how they would huddle together during thunderstorms, trembling and clinging to each other. The previous nannies had tried different approaches. Mrs. Crawford had simply told them to be brave, while Patricia had tried to distract them with games and activities. But Ruby understood that fear couldn't be dismissed or distracted away. It had to be acknowledged and gently soothed. When the first rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, Ruby saw both boys freeze in the middle of playing with their building blocks. Their eyes went wide and they moved closer together the way they always did when they felt scared. "Oh my," Ruby said calmly. "Sounds like we're getting a big storm tonight. Come here, sweet boys. Let's sit together and listen to what the sky is saying." Instead of trying to make them ignore the storm, Ruby gathered Michael and David onto the big couch in the living room. She wrapped a soft blanket around all 3 of them and settled them close against her sides. "You know," she said softly, as another rumble of thunder echoed overhead, "when I was a little girl in Alabama, my grandmother taught me that storms have their own music. The rain is like drums, and the thunder is like a big bass voice singing deep and low." The boys pressed closer to her as lightning lit up the windows, followed by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the whole house. "But the best part," Ruby continued, beginning to hum very softly, is when you add your own voice to the storm song. Let me show you what my grandmother taught me. Ruby began to hum a low, gentle melody that seemed to match the rhythm of the rain against the windows. It was an old spiritual, wade in the water, but she hummed it so softly and sweetly that it sounded like a lullaby. As she hummed, Ruby could feel the tension leaving the boys' bodies. They stopped trembling and started listening. The melody seemed to wrap around them like an extra blanket, making the scary storm sounds feel less frightening. Then something magical happened. David, still pressed against Ruby's side, began to hum along. It was barely audible at first, just a whisper of sound, but it was definitely there. Ruby's heart began to race, but she forced herself to stay calm and keep humming as if nothing unusual was happening. Within moments, Michael joined in too. Two little voices humming together for the first time in their lives, blending with Ruby's deeper voice and the storm outside. Ruby felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't stop humming. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the crack in the wall that would let all the stored-up words come flooding out. When the song ended, the three of them sat quietly for a moment, listening to the rain. Then David looked up at Ruby with his bright blue eyes and spoke his first word. More. It was barely a whisper, so soft that Ruby almost thought she had imagined it. But Michael heard it too, and his eyes went wide with surprise. More, David said again, a little louder this time, looking right at Ruby. Oh, sweet boy, Ruby whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Yes, we can sing more. We can sing as much as you want. She began humming again, and both boys joined in immediately, more confidently this time. When that song ended, David spoke again. More song, please, 4 words. In 48 hours, David had gone from complete silence to asking for what he wanted with actual words. But the real miracle came when Michael, not to be outdone by his brother, looked at Ruby and said clearly, I like singing. Ruby had to bite her lip to keep from sobbing with joy. These boys, who had been silent for 4 years, were talking. Their voices were clear and sweet, with no speech problems at all. They had simply been waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right feeling of safety to let their words out. I like singing too, Ruby managed to say through her tears. And I love hearing your beautiful voices. From that moment on, it was as if a dam had burst. Over the next few days, David and Michael began talking more and more. Simple words at first. Yes, no, please, thank you, but then longer sentences. Ruby, will you sing the storm song again? David asked the next morning at breakfast. I want to learn all the words, Michael added, his eyes bright with excitement. Ruby worked with them patiently, teaching them the words to all the songs she knew, making up new ones together, and most importantly, listening to everything they had been storing up to say for 4 long years. They talked about their dreams, their fears, their favorite foods, and their secret games. They asked questions about everything. Why was the sky blue? Where did Ruby come from? What were all the different birds in their backyard called? We were waiting, David explained to Ruby one afternoon while they colored together. We were waiting for someone who would really listen. We tried to talk before, Michael added seriously, but nobody understood, so we stopped trying. Ruby's heart ached as she realized what had happened. These sensitive, intelligent boys had tried to communicate when they were babies and toddlers, but somehow the adults around them had missed their attempts or misunderstood their needs. So they had retreated into silence, creating their own world where they felt safe. When Helen came home that first evening after the breakthrough, she found her sons chattering away with Ruby in the kitchen, helping make dinner and talking about their day like any other 4-year-olds. Helen stood in the doorway, hardly believing what she was hearing. Her boys, her silent boys, were talking and laughing and asking Ruby if they could help set the table. Mama, David called when he saw her, running over to hug her legs. We learned new songs today. Want to hear? Helen sank down to her knees and gathered both boys in her arms, tears streaming down her face as they began singing one of Ruby's songs in their clear, perfect voices. The silence that had filled her house for 4 years was finally broken, replaced by the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, her children's laughter and voices. Free at last. By Christmas of 1962, the Thompson house had become a completely different place. Where once there had been worried silence, now there was the constant chatter of 2 4-year-old boys who had 4 years' worth of talking to catch up on. Michael and David asked questions about everything, told stories about their dreams, and sang the songs Ruby had taught them from morning until night. But the changes went deeper than just words. The boys who had once hidden from visitors now ran to greet guests at the door. They showed off their toys, asked strangers their names, and invited everyone to hear their latest songs. Helen and Robert watched in amazement as their sons transformed from silent, withdrawn children into confident, joyful little boys. It's like they were just waiting for permission to be themselves, Helen told her sister during one of their phone calls. Ruby didn't just teach them to talk. She taught them that their voices mattered. The transformation wasn't lost on the medical professionals who had been following the boys' case. Dr. Peterson, the child psychologist who had evaluated them months earlier, came for a follow-up visit in January and could hardly believe what he saw. "David, can you tell me about your favorite color?" he asked during his assessment. "I like blue because it's the same color as the sky," David answered confidently. "But I also like red because that's the color of Ruby's favorite dress. And green because that's what the grass looks like when it's happy." Dr. Peterson looked at his notes from the previous visit, when David had communicated only through pointing and gestures. "Michael, what do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be a singer like Ruby," Michael announced proudly. "But also maybe a bird doctor, because birds need help sometimes too." After spending 2 hours with the boys, Dr. Peterson sat down with Helen and Robert to discuss his findings. "I have to be honest," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "I've never seen anything like this. These children show no signs of developmental delays, speech impediments, or psychological disorders. Their language skills are actually above average for their age." He paused, looking through his notes. What they were experiencing appears to have been selective mutism, a condition where children who are capable of speech don't speak in certain situations or with certain people. It's usually caused by anxiety or trauma, though sometimes the trigger is so subtle we never identify it. "But what changed?" Robert asked. "Why are they talking now?" Dr. Peterson smiled. "From what I can observe, Miss Washington created an environment where these boys felt completely safe and valued. She didn't pressure them to speak or treat their silence as a problem to be fixed. Instead, she showed them that their thoughts and feelings mattered, regardless of whether they expressed them in words." The doctor's conclusion was that Michael and David had been caught in a cycle of anxiety about speaking that had started when they were very young. Perhaps they had attempted to communicate as babies and felt misunderstood. Maybe they had been overwhelmed by expectations or frightened by loud voices. Whatever the original cause, they had learned that staying silent was safer than risking disappointment or confusion. Ruby broke that cycle, Dr. Peterson explained. She communicated with them through music, touch, and patient observation. She learned their language before asking them to learn hers. But Ruby's impact on the family went beyond just helping the boys find their voices. She had taught Helen and Robert new ways to connect with their children, showing them that love wasn't just about providing for their physical needs or trying to fix their problems. "I used to think being a good parent meant having all the answers," Helen confided to Ruby one evening as they watched the boys play in the backyard. "But you've shown me that sometimes the best thing I can do is just listen and trust that they'll tell me what they need." Ruby smiled, watching Michael push David on the swing while both boys sang at the top of their lungs. "Children are born knowing how to love and how to learn," she said. "Sometimes we adults just need to get out of their way and let them show us who they really are." As spring arrived, Helen and Robert faced a difficult reality. Ruby had always planned to return to Alabama to care for her aging mother. She had stayed longer than originally intended, wanting to make sure the boys were truly settled in their new voices. "I don't know how to let you go," Helen told Ruby tearfully as they discussed the transition. "You've given us our sons back. How do we thank someone for that?" "You don't need to thank me," Ruby replied gently. "Those boys were always there, just waiting for the right moment to bloom. You and Mr. Thompson are wonderful parents. You just needed to learn to trust yourselves and trust your children." Ruby spent several weeks preparing the family for her departure. She taught Helen and Robert the songs that had become part of the boys' daily routine. She showed them how to use music and storytelling to help the boys process difficult emotions. Most importantly, she helped them understand that their sons' voices were gifts that needed to be treasured, not taken for granted. "The most important thing," Ruby explained during one of their last conversations, "is to keep listening. Really listening. Not just to their words, but to their hearts. These boys have learned that their voices matter, but they need to keep feeling that every day. When the day came for Ruby to leave, the whole family gathered on the front porch to say goodbye. Michael and David had made her cards with crayon drawings of the three of them singing together. David had written, "Thank you for teaching us songs," in his careful 4-year-old handwriting, while Michael had drawn a picture of Ruby with musical notes floating around her head. "Will you come back to visit us?" David asked, holding tightly to Ruby's hand. "And will you remember all our songs?" Michael added, tears in his bright blue eyes. Ruby knelt down to hug both boys one last time. "I will never forget a single song we learned together," she promised. "And every time you sing, I'll hear you in my heart, no matter how far away I am." As the taxi pulled away from the house on Elm Street, Ruby looked back to see the Thompson family standing together on their porch, waving and calling out their goodbyes. For the first time since she'd known them, their voices filled the air without any hint of silence or fear. 6 months later, Helen received a letter from Ruby with a photograph enclosed. It showed Ruby sitting on her front porch in Alabama with an elderly woman who looked just like her. "Dear Thompson family," the letter read, "I hope this finds you all well and still singing. Mama is doing much better with me here to help her, and she loves hearing the stories about Michael and David. I told her about the storm song, and now she hums it too when the weather gets rough. Please give those sweet boys my love and tell them that Miss Ruby thinks about them every day. Keep singing, keep talking, and keep listening to each other. Love always, Ruby. P.S. I heard a mockingbird outside my window this morning, and it reminded me of our lullabies. Some voices are just too beautiful to keep quiet." Years later, when Michael and David had grown into teenagers, they would still remember the woman who had taught them that their voices mattered. They remembered the songs, the stories, and most of all, the feeling of being truly heard for the first time in their lives. The house on Elm Street was never silent again. It became a place filled with laughter, conversation, and music. A home where two boys had learned that love could break through any barrier, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is simply the permission to be themselves. Ruby Washington had traveled 800 miles to help two children find their voices. But in the end, she had given them something even more precious, the knowledge that they were worth listening to, and that their words had the power to fill the world with joy.